About the time of the end, the biblical prophet Ezekiel tells of a future invasion of Israel by a vast coalition of nations, known as the Battle of Gog and Magog. We find this in Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39. As we read the headlines in the newspapers of today and witness the conflicts in the Middle East, it's not hard to imagine that this invasion, prophesied over 2,600 years ago, could be fulfilled in the immediate future. Ezekiel 36 and 37 predicts a gathering of the Jews to the nation of Israel, which will be followed by this massive invasion. For 19 centuries, the Jewish people were scattered throughout the world, and until May 14, 1948, there was no nation of Israel to invade. With the nation of Israel now a reality, the stage seems set for that war which could usher in the tribulation and the rise of the Antichrist, a war which will end with the destruction of Israel's enemies by God Himself. As you read Ezekiel 38 and 39, it isn't just the creation of the nation of Israel that makes this prophecy seem likely to be fulfilled in the near future. The nations that God tells us will form this coalition against Israel seem more likely now than perhaps ever to form such an alliance. The leaders of this coalition will be Russia and Iran, and currently both of these nations are right on Israel's doorstep, under the pretense of battling ISIS in Syria. Russia, with its huge Muslim population, along with Israel's archenemy Iran, will lead the Gog-Magog coalition in invading Israel, fulfilling Ezekiel 38. A wealthy oil field controlling Israel might be the hooks in the jaw that cause Russia to invade Israel. Unfortunately for Russia, Iran, and the rest of the coalition, God will intervene, protecting Israel and wiping out 6/7 of the entire Russian military. We're witnessing a stunning move by Russia and Iran as they send military forces into combat in Syria. For the first time, these two nations, historic enemies, are operating together in a military alliance, one that will have profound consequences for the security of the region, and one that poses a grave danger to the security of Israel.
Today, I want to address two very significant developments that took place since our last update. It's been a couple weeks now since we've had a prophecy update. The first has to do with Turkey moving into Syria, and the second has to do with the United States related to both Iran and Russia. I want to preface this by reminding you that there was a deliberate, even concerted effort on the part of the President of the United States of America to basically relinquish the Middle East to none other than Russia and Iran. We talked about that in a previous update. I think it is germane to our understanding of what we see now taking place in the Middle East as we now see what Turkey is doing in concert with both Iran and Russia, which of course, as you know, is Ezekiel 38, down to the very detail of that particular and specific prophecy. Now, it's important to note that all that's happening is taking place amidst the backdrop of terrorist attacks, earthquakes, and everything in between. This was the news in addition to the stunning and unprecedented development concerning Turkey's ground operation into Syria. Again, you'd be hard-pressed, especially on CNN, because all they want to do is run 2-hour things on gun control in the United States. Now, here's the thing. Turkey claims that this is to fight against the Islamic State in Syria. Well, wait a minute, Turkey. Iran's already there. Russia's already there. The U.S. is, well, sort of already, maybe, kind of, definitely maybe there. Why do you need to go in there? Well, I'll tell you why they're there. It's not ISIS so much as it is the Kurds. They are threatened by and fighting against the Kurds. I know you see CNN up here, and you'll forgive me for quoting the anti-Israel, anti-Christian CNN, and they are, and it's getting worse, by the way. On Wednesday, they published an article about the Turkish state media reporting concerning Turkey sending tanks into Syria. In it, they quote Erdogan, Turkey's president, as saying that Turkey's incursion into Syrian territory is part of a larger effort to battle not only ISIS, but also Kurdish fighters in northern Syria. To which I ask the question, who is fighting who? Who's on whose side? Who's who and why? And what are you doing there anyway? Why Syria? Have you seen how small Syria is? I'll tell you why it's Syria. It's Syria because of Isaiah 17 and Ezekiel 38. Before my father died in August of 1994, he told me to keep my eyes on Syria. And what's interesting is he told me this when I called him in September of 1993 to ask him about the signing of the Oslo peace accords between Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat. My dad, you have to understand, from Egypt, a BA in theology, knew the scriptures better than I did at that point in my life, wasn't a believer, had an intellectual knowledge, but did not have a saving knowledge, which was really difficult. I prayed for him for so many years, and I'll never forget, it was August the 14th, 1994. And the reason I remember that date is because it was a Saturday, and my wife and I were on our way to the prayer meeting at our church at the time, and he was in the hospital. I went to go visit him, and as I was leaving, he said to me, "Son, I love you. I am very proud of you, and God bless you." Now, you have to understand, in the Arab culture, I didn't realize it at the time, but what he was doing was pronouncing a blessing upon me before he died, akin to what we see in the Old Testament, particularly with Isaac and Jacob, and pronouncing that blessing. It's so important that before the patriarch dies, that they pass on that blessing of God onto the firstborn son, and that's what he was doing. And I really believe that I'm hoping that I will see my Father in heaven, my earthly father in heaven with my heavenly Father. But he had a real firm grasp on the Middle East. And I always used to ask him Bible prophecy questions. I was hoping to start up a discussion, with him to kind of lead him in that direction. But it was really puzzling to me that here's the Palestinians, so-called, signing this historic peace agreement with Israel in September of 1993, and my dad's response to that is, keep your eye on Syria? Syria has nothing to do with that. Oh, but they do. They do. Why? Because Syria was, is, and will continue to be the catalyst specifically related to the fulfillment of Bible prophecy concerning Israel. And as such, I would argue, and by the way, I'm in good company with this, that the prophecy in Isaiah 17 about Damascus becoming a ruinous heap, so much so that it becomes uninhabitable, I would argue this is about to be fulfilled at any time. And when it does, I believe it will swiftly set in motion the fulfillment of other prophecies, related prophecies, chief of which is Ezekiel 38 and 39. And please listen, this is very important. I am coming to the place now where I believe that it will either be subsequently or possibly even simultaneously. What do you mean? I believe that Ezekiel 38 will either happen subsequent to Isaiah 17 or simultaneously with Isaiah 17. And if that's the case, in either case, the implications are profound. I found this Times of Israel report on Tuesday quite interesting. In it, they quote the UN humanitarian chief as saying that, quote, Syria has become the greatest crisis of our time. That's why everybody's in Syria. Syria is a catalyst. Syria is the nexus. It's the linchpin, if you please. I found this BBC report even more interesting, and this for two reasons. The first of which is that the headline reads as if the United States has to ask permission from Russia before they do anything in the Middle East. Have you noticed that? Again, this is why I mentioned at the beginning, by way of a preface, that is germane to our understanding that Obama deliberately relinquished the Middle East, namely Iran and Russia, to them. This was very deliberate. And so now, where's the United States? Well, the United States has to check in with Putin before they do anything, especially if they're going to do anything in Syria. Who would have ever imagined? The second reason I find this even more interesting is because the report on the situation in the town of Daraya. Daraya is about a 20-minute drive from Damascus. Here's what they had to say. For years, those living in Daraya have endured constant shelling as well as suffering shortages of food, water, and electricity. Some of those leaving said the town had become uninhabitable. Uninhabitable. Now, what do we know to be true about Damascus, 20 minutes away? Well, it is believed that Saddam Hussein's weapons of mass destruction were transported to Bashar al-Assad in Syria, and they are underground in Damascus. Boy, that would surely fit and explain it, wouldn't it? Wouldn't that explain Isaiah 17 and Damascus becoming uninhabitable? This brings us to the developments concerning Iran, who, according to the Washington Times, has not changed their behavior like we think or thought that they would since Obama's nuclear deal. Let me quote briefly the Times. A pair of dangerously close encounters. You hear about this one? Just this last week? A pair of dangerously close encounters between the Iranian and U.S. navies in the Persian Gulf this week have raised fresh questions about Tehran's intentions a year after Obama administration officials hoped the much-touted nuclear deal would moderate the behavior of the Islamic Republic and its military. Again, you'll forgive me for repeating myself, but the reason I prefaced at the beginning with this statement that Obama deliberately gave the Middle East to Russia and Iran tells me that they did not really have any hopes that they would change their behavior. He basically signed the check over the title deed to the Middle East over to Russia and Iran exactly as Ezekiel some 2,500 years prior said it would be. It's happening. It's happened. It's now happening. It's already happened. To say that this is disconcerting would be a gross understatement, and it's evidenced by this Fox News report on Friday. According to a defense official, Iran's confrontations with our U.S. Navy is up 50% this year. Can any of us get out of our minds that picture of our men on their knees? On their knees. What has happened to the United States of America, this beloved country, once the most greatest and blessed nation on earth. If this weren't bad enough, to add insult to injury, we learned that the U.S. paid $1.3 billion with a B to Iran just 2 days after the cash delivery of $400 million back in January. According to Ynet News, the U.S. says it paid $1.3 billion to Iran in January from a little-known fund for resolving international disputes 2 days after allowing a plane load of cash to fly to Tehran. State Department spokeswoman Elizabeth Trudeau says the U.S. can't say more about the January 19th payments because of diplomatic sensitivities. They involved, get this, 13 separate payments of $99,999,999.99.
As the forces of the Russian dictator Gog and his military coalition, including Iran, Persia, Libya and Algeria, Put, Sudan, Kush, Turkey, Gomer, and other Islamic nations, Beth Togarmah, converges against the state of Israel in the last days, the Hebrew prophet Ezekiel tells us that at the last moment, when there seems to be no hope for Israeli Jews, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is going to supernaturally intervene and come to the rescue. Consider Ezekiel 38:18 and 19. It will come about on that day, when Gog comes against the land of Israel, declares the Lord God, that my fury will mount up in my anger. In my zeal and in my blazing wrath, I will declare that on that day there will surely be a great earthquake in the land of Israel. Ezekiel tells us that this earthquake will shake the entire globe, and all the men who are on the face of the earth will shake in my presence. 38:20. The enemy forces will become so frightened and disoriented during this massive earthquake that they will turn and start fighting each other. Terrible diseases, pestilence, will start to spread through the enemy forces. 38:21. As God judges these enemies of Israel, Ezekiel explains that the Lord will rain on him, Gog, and on his troops, and on the many people who are with him, a torrential rain, with hailstones, fire, and brimstone. 38:22. In a scene evocative of a Hollywood blockbuster, fire from heaven will fall on the enemies of Israel, consume and destroying them in divine judgment. The Lord also says, I will send fire upon Magog and those who inhabit the coastlands in safety. 39:6. In other words, parts of Russia and other enemy countries will be devastated supernaturally by fire from heaven. The Bible does not tell us exactly how this will happen, but it clearly describes a supernatural judgment. This does not appear in the text to be a war started by the Israeli Defense Forces. Those do not appear to be missiles from the Israeli Air Force. There's no evidence in the text of Israeli military forces on the move and defending themselves and their nation. Perhaps Israeli leaders at that point are engaged in diplomacy, trying to persuade the Russian leader to stand down and back off. Perhaps Israeli leaders at that time are hoping for the U.S. or the UN or other nations to intervene diplomatically or even militarily to protect them. Whatever the case, the text does not provide clear evidence of the Israeli military going into action to protect their country or defeat their enemies. Rather, the text indicates that the God of Israel steps in and defends Israel himself, raining fire and brimstone down on the enemy forces and utterly destroying them, and doing so at the very last possible moment when all hope appears to have been lost. Why does God act to protect the nation of Israel and defeat Israel's enemies? The Lord tells us directly in Ezekiel 38:22 and 23, to bring judgment and to reveal himself and his power and glory to Israel and the nations. With pestilence and with blood I will enter into judgment with him, Gog. I will magnify myself, sanctify myself, and make myself known in the sight of many nations, that they will know that I am the Lord. The devastation that results from these divine judgments is so horrific that chapter 39 tells us it takes the Israelis 7 months to bury all the bodies of the enemy forces. 39:12 through 16. Ezekiel tells us it would probably take longer than 7 months, but the birds of the air and the beasts of the field eat many of the bodies. 39 verses 17 through 20. The prophecies regarding Gog and Magog remind us that sin has its consequences. God said in Genesis 12:1 through 3, that those who bless the children of Abraham will be blessed, but those who curse them will be cursed. God is patient, He's slow to anger, but when pushed too far, He will act against those who hate the Jewish people and seek to rob, kill, and destroy them. Let the nations be warned.